Hey guys, tonight we begin under a sky powdered with stars, where the desert air has that soft, dry crispness you only get in the dead of night. You stand at the foot of the great Sphinx of Giza, an ancient stone creature, half lion, half man, all mystery. Its face watches you with an eerie calm, eyes worn smooth by centuries of wind and worship. There's a certain stillness here, a kind of hush that settles in your bones, but the closer you get, the stranger it seems. Because tonight you're not looking at what's there, you're noticing what's missing. The Sphinx's regal face is, how shall we put this, somewhat underdressed. Specifically, the chin is bare, beardless. And if you're thinking, wait, didn't pharaohs always wear those fake looking braided goatees in every cartoon ever? You're not wrong. And yet, here stands the oldest monumental sculpture in the world and not a whisker in sight. What gives? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your feet on the stone plaza in front of the Sphinx, the gravel crunching underfoot. It's hard to tell what's real here and what's reconstruction. There are slabs of stone from the 20th century snuggling up next to blocks older than the pyramids. The creature's paws stretch out almost cat-like, while its stern face looks a little like someone who's been politely disappointed for 4,000 years. The thing is, that face once had a beard. Not just any beard, a royal ceremonial false beard, carefully braided and hooked beneath the chin. It's not just a guess. Fragments of it were found, but they're not on the statue now. They're gone. Well, sort of. The story of that beard is long, winding, and, if we're being honest, a little absurd. It includes missing shipments, ancient rituals, Cold War politics, and at least one museum worker who probably wishes they'd called in sick that day. And if you think losing your keys is bad, imagine misplacing the chin hair of a national treasure for a few millennia. Then losing it again, then possibly gluing it back on upside down. But back to the present, or at least this present moment in the past. You wander slowly around the Sphinx, imagining what it once looked like when the limestone was painted in vivid reds and blues. Historians still argue whether it had a cobra headdress, false ears, or elaborate paint detailing, but nearly everyone agrees it once had something hanging from that chin. You picture the beard, stiff, sculpted, a little over the top, pharaoh fashion in full swing. And why wouldn't it have one? After all, every pharaoh worth his pyramid had one. Even the female pharaoh Hatshepsut wore a fake beard for public appearances. It wasn't about facial hair, it was about godhood, legitimacy, and reminding people you were closer to Osiris than the average mortal. So, where did the Sphinx's beard go? Here's where the story begins to tangle. Ancient Egypt wasn't exactly keeping digital records. Over the centuries, this statue, older than Stonehenge, was buried, uncovered, buried again, and neglected to the point where 18th century travelers thought it was just a weird rock sticking out of the sand. At one point, only the head poked out like it was being slowly swallowed by time. And somewhere along that journey, the beard vanished, or fell off, or was stolen. Or maybe it never truly belonged in the first place. You squint to the darkness, trying to picture it. The beard. Not majestic and attached, but shattered, lying in pieces, half buried beneath centuries of wind-blown dust. And then the odd thought strikes. What if the Sphinx never had a beard to begin with? A few scholars argue just that the famous false beard fragments actually belong to a different statue, that they were slapped on later, maybe as part of a renovation campaign. Historians still debate whether the Sphinx was originally beardless or if its goatee was added as a political flex by a later pharaoh trying to retro-style an ancient idol. Others insist it was always there, that the beard was part of the original design, and its collapse was just a sad inevitability, thanks to erosion and a couple of thousand years of foot traffic, tourism, and slightly overenthusiastic archaeologists. Meanwhile, your mind drifts through time like a breeze through the palms. You imagine yourself in 1400 BCE, watching a high priest supervise the annual beard polishing ceremony. Probably not a real thing, but still fun to picture. And if you're wondering what the beard looked like, well, it's complicated. Based on the fragments, It had the standard woven style, possibly curved upward at the tip, like the ones worn by Osiris, the god of the afterlife. And that curve is important. A straight beard meant you were a living king. A curved one? That meant you joined the divine Zoom call in the sky. So maybe the Sphinx's beard wasn't just missing, it had ascended. Or more likely, it fell off and got buried by camel dung and neglect. But eventually, someone would stumble across it, sort of. For now, you linger at the Sphinx's front paws, watching a stray cat dart through the shadows. The monument looms above you, silent and still. Its missing beard feels like a whisper in the stone, not quite gone, just waiting to be found again. And maybe, in a roundabout way, it finally was. But to explain that, we'll need to hop forward a few thousand years to a dusty storeroom and a box labeled Misc Fragments. Trust me, you'll want to open it. The box is unimpressive at first glance. Just another anonymous crate in a Cairo museum storeroom, tucked behind a busted fan and a stack of maps that haven't been relevant since the 1930s. Dust lies thick over the label. You give it a dramatic blow, because what's the point of visiting a mysterious museum if you can't feel like Indiana Jones once in a while? And inside? Well, there it is. Several pieces of finely carved limestone, curved and grooved, flecked with ancient pigments. They don't look like much, unless, of course, you know exactly what you're looking for. And someone at some point in the early 1950s did. These fragments, it turns out, are believed to be all that remains of the Sphinx's ceremonial beard. You reach out in your mind and trace the ridges with your fingertips. Cool stone, expertly chiseled lines running in tight braids down what would have been the pharaoh's chin. This was no afterthought. This was a statement. I am divine, I am timeless, also I have an excellent grooming team. False beards in ancient Egypt weren't just costume accessories, they were sacred objects, carved out of wood, metal, or stone, often gilded and even worn with chin straps. Pharaohs were frequently depicted with them, long, square, sometimes intricately braided, and always sending the same message: mortal, meet your god king. But here's the twist: only the elite could wear them. Commoners, no beard for you. In fact, real facial hair was often shaved. Beards were too messy for daily life. But fake beards, those were practically required for your divine LinkedIn profile. And the Sphinx, while not technically a person, did represent Pharaoh Khafre, if we go with the mainstream theory. Historians still debate whether the face on the Sphinx actually matches Khafre or if it was retrofitted later. Some even suggest it might be his predecessor, Djedefre, or a composite ideal pharaoh, kind of like an ancient Photoshop profile picture. Back to the beard. It's the 1950s, and Egypt is on the cusp of massive political change. The monarchy is teetering, nationalism is rising, foreign archaeologists are still crawling over the country like curious ants, digging up whatever the sand will surrender. Somewhere in this shifting landscape, the fragments are formally identified, cataloged, noted, and largely forgotten again. At least for a while, because although museum records acknowledge the pieces, there wasn't much urgency to do anything with them. They weren't flashy enough for a main display, just dusty chunks of the distant past, waiting for a curator with time, funding, and the good sense not to use hardware store glue, which, spoiler alert, comes later. But let's pause here and talk about the beard's symbolism a little more, because this thing was dripping with cosmic significance. Ancient Egyptians believed the pharaoh was the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and upon death would join Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. The false beard was a visual shorthand for this divine journey, worn during rituals, funerals, and maybe even particularly stressful cabinet meetings. And Osiris himself? Always shown with that curved, stylized goatee, the same curve that may have adorned the Sphinx's original beard fragments. This curve wasn't just aesthetic. It was cosmic branding. Curved beard equals I'm dead but powerful. Respect the vibe. Now imagine how important it must have been, culturally and religiously, to keep that symbolism intact. Losing the beard would have been like decapitating a saint statue or carving a mustache onto the Mona Lisa. In fact, when the Sphinx lost its nose, that already sparked centuries of rumor and rage, some blaming Napoleon, others blaming bored soldiers with target practice issues. Historians still argue whether the nose was shot off, worn down, or hacked off intentionally. Surprise. So losing the beard? Not ideal. And finding it in fragments? Years later, dusty and ignored, added a strange layer of irony to an already surreal story. You shift on your feet and picture the crate being wheeled out into the bright light of day, the fragments laid carefully on a table. One by one, experts lean over them, murmuring in several languages, some excited, some skeptical, all squinting with the suspicion of someone trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are soup. And it raises questions. Was this the beard, or one of several ceremonial attachments used for religious purposes? Could it have fallen off due to natural erosion, or was it forcibly removed, maybe even stolen and then quietly returned to avoid an international incident? Some fringe theorists whisper that the beard went on a little holiday in a private collection in Europe, only to find its way back, anonymously donated by someone whose conscience outpaced their greed. There's no proof, of course, but it wouldn't be the first time that happened. Ancient artifacts have a way of walking. You stretch your mind back to that dimly lit storeroom again. Someone, maybe a junior curator, picks up a curved fragment and runs their thumb along the groove. It's smooth but worn, like the edge of a seashell. It doesn't look like much, but to the right person, it's priceless. A piece of a monument, a piece of an ancient identity, a whisper from a civilization that once ruled by the flooding of a river and the shifting of stars. And soon someone would have the bold idea to glue it back on, but not quite yet. First comes the part where the beard gets forgotten again. Refiled, misfiled, or simply ignored while bigger, shinier exhibits take center stage. Somewhere in the background of Egypt's many museum corridors, the Sphinx's beard sits patiently, waiting for a chance to return to its former chin. And as you drift through this chapter, head resting on a cool cotton pillow, you can almost feel the smooth surface of the stone under your fingertips. That weight of time. That strange sense that everything lost eventually finds its way back, though not always in the form you'd expect. You're still in the museum storeroom, well, mentally. But now the scene shifts. The beard fragments lie in storage, quietly aging like wine or that pile of unread books on your nightstand. Nobody's quite sure what to do with them, and it's not until a spark of public interest returns to the Sphinx that they even begin to matter again. The Sphinx is having a bit of a cultural moment, as it often does. Tourists flock to Giza, snapping sunlit selfies in front of the ancient stone face. Schoolchildren stare at it in textbooks, and yet as you tilt your head, you realize something is off. Still no beard, still no nose, still a lot of mystery for one severely weathered lion-man hybrid. But let's rewind the stone clock a bit, back to the days when the Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand, literally. For much of its history, the Sphinx wasn't majestically overlooking the desert like a dignified sentinel. Nope, it was napping. Face exposed, body hidden under centuries of desert drift. Basically, the ancient world's most dramatic game of peekaboo. Excavations started in earnest in the early 19th century. The sand came off slowly, revealing those massive paws, the long body, and eventually signs of significant wear and tear. And that's when people started asking some awkward questions, like, why is the nose gone? You might have heard the popular rumor. Napoleon's troops used the Sphinx for target practice during their Egyptian campaign. Bang! Off with the nose. Romantic as that theory is, historians still argue whether it holds water. Some scholars believe the nose was already missing centuries earlier based on sketches from the 1700s. Others point to religious iconoclasts during the 14th century who considered statues blasphemous and went around chipping off noses like it was the ultimate act of righteous rebellion. There's even graffiti from the time that suggests one such individual was prosecuted for damaging the Sphinx. Because, yes, ancient Egyptians had laws about statue vandalism. Imagine getting community service for defacing a god lion. And while everyone focused on the nose, no one really noticed when the beard disappeared. Or perhaps by then, it already had. It's unclear when exactly the beard fell off, or if it was even properly attached in the first place. Some archaeologists believe it may have been a later addition, possibly from the New Kingdom era, well after the original statue was carved. That would mean someone essentially went, you know what this 70-foot limestone catman needs? A solid goatee upgrade. Other experts maintain that the beard was part of the original design, citing mortises and slots carved into the chin area where stone additions might have once fit snugly, like beard Lego. If so, time, Erosion and maybe a particularly aggressive windstorm could have knocked it off. Picture the moment. One gust too many, one tremor in the earth, and thud. The ceremonial chin fluff collapses in a cascade of rock and dignity. Sand swallows it, and the Sphinx simply shrugs and continues staring into eternity. But what if the beard was removed on purpose? One fringe theory suggests the beard was detached deliberately during a period of political upheaval. Maybe a ruler wanted to make a statement, to distance themselves from the Sphinx's symbolic authority. Or maybe they just needed a lot of limestone for a home DIY project. Hey, you never know. Either way, it's gone. By the time modern photography starts capturing the Sphinx in the 19th and early 20th centuries, there's no beard in sight. The statue looks stately, serene, and a little incomplete, like a king who forgot his tie. And here's another twist. Some experts propose that there was never a beard on the original Sphinx at all, that the beard fragments found might have come from nearby temples or statues. Maybe they were dropped there by accident. Maybe ancient workers reused stone scraps. Maybe we've been staring at a case of mistaken chin density all along. That theory gains steam when you look closely at the style of the fragments. They resemble beards from the New Kingdom era, not necessarily the Old Kingdom period when the Sphinx was likely carved. If true, that could mean the beard was a retrofitted accessory, like someone slapping a Bluetooth speaker on a gramophone. Still, the mainstream view holds that the beard did belong to the Sphinx. The angle of the fragments, the presence of ancient connectors, the stylistic match, all suggest it once graced that noble chin. And the missing pieces? Possibly broken off and scattered in the sand, taken as souvenirs, or still resting quietly beneath some tourist's feet even now. You shift again in your imaginary sandals, peering up at the statue's face. Even without the beard, it holds an undeniable presence. The kind of calm that only comes from watching empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. The Sphinx has seen conquerors come and go. It's endured invasions, revolutions, and the occasional pigeon problem. And through it all, it's remained oddly still, except for the parts that crumbled. But it wouldn't stay that way forever, because eventually someone would get the bright idea to restore the beard. And that, well, let's just say it didn't go quite as planned. The year is 1955, and Egypt is still catching its breath from a revolution. The monarchy has been ousted, the air smells of change, and national pride is on the rise like the morning Nile. Somewhere in the background, a few museum officials are examining a long-forgotten box. Uh, Inside, those stubbornly enigmatic fragments from the base of the Sphinx. Someone raises an eyebrow. Could this be? And just like that, the Sphinx's beard becomes interesting again. The Cairo Museum, still humming with colonial leftovers and old wooden cases that creak like haunted ships, decides it's time for a little home improvement. A team of restorers, enthusiastic but not exactly world-renowned, take up the job. Their task? To piece together those limestone beard chunks and, ideally, reunite them with the Sphinx's chin. You imagine the workshop. Tools clink, a magnifying lens is adjusted, someone's sipping mint tea a little too close to the artifacts. And the air is thick with that dangerous combination of ambition and, good enough. Now, before we get too harsh, let's be fair. Restoration is hard. You're trying to reassemble a jigsaw puzzle that's missing half the pieces, written in a dead language, and carved 4,000 years ago by people who probably weren't expecting you to superglue it back together. Still, one might argue that using epoxy glue, the kind you might use to fix a wobbly table leg, was not the most cautious move, but that's exactly what they did. In a now infamous act of repair, museum staff mixed modern adhesive and got to work. They began attaching fragments together with what one contemporary conservator later described as the enthusiasm of a home hobbyist and the precision of a distracted squirrel. The result? A lumpy, chemically compromised mess that barely held together and looked, well, let's just say it didn't scream divine regality. More like ancient lint roller. Historians still argue whether this so-called restoration was authorized at the top levels or just a well-meaning act of archaeological improvisation. Some records suggest it may have started informally, a quick fix that spiraled out of control. Others imply it was quietly swept under the rug once the results proved less than majestic. What's certain is this: the epoxy degraded the stone, It seeped into the ancient porous limestone, creating hairline cracks and discoloration. Instead of returning the beard to its former glory, the attempt left it looking like someone had tried to repair a Fabergé egg with duct tape and hope. You picture the poor technician, probably sweating under the fluorescent lights, watching in slow motion as one of the pieces pops off mid-glue. Maybe it lands on a foam mat, maybe it doesn't. Maybe they say something unprintable in Arabic and vow never to touch pharaonic artifacts again. And the Sphinx? Well, it remained aloof and chinless. Out at Giza, tourists kept visiting, mostly unaware that part of its ceremonial hairpiece had recently been Frankensteined together in downtown Cairo using off-the-shelf chemicals. For a brief time, the reconstructed beard was displayed behind glass. It was announced as a triumph. Look, the Sphinx's beard resurrected after thousands of years. Newspaper clippings from the era show grainy black and white photos of museum staff looking proud, if slightly uncertain. But not everyone was impressed. Scholars began grumbling, conservators groaned, international experts raised eyebrows so high they needed extra forehead space. The general vibe? You did what to the beard? Eventually, the display was taken down. The pieces were stored once more, and the Sphinx went back to being beardless in public. This odd little incident serves as a kind of metaphor, doesn't it? Our modern attempts to patch the past, well-meaning, rushed, a little clumsy, often leave more questions than answers. But the fragments were, at least, back on the radar, and that meant others would come along with sharper eyes and less glue. You stretch your limbs under the blanket, picturing the contrast. The original craftsman of the Sphinx's beard, likely working in silence under the blazing Egyptian sun, chisel in hand, every tap of the mallet precise. And then, thousands of years later, a conservator in rolled-up sleeves, muttering over an epoxy canister and praying no one walks in mid-botch. There's something oddly comforting about it all. Even the great mysteries of history come down to very human moments. Good intentions, bad tools, and the eternal question, should I be doing this, or will someone yell at me later? Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate about the beard's travels. Had it ever left Egypt? Were parts of it lost, sold, hidden? Might a piece be sitting in a private European collection, mislabeled as ornamental doorstop, vaguely Egyptian? One unconfirmed story involves a bearded fragment being briefly displayed in a Berlin antiquities exhibit in the early 1960s, though no clear records exist. Fringe theorists suggest Cold War powers may have trafficked small artifacts as diplomatic bargaining chips, or as trophies of quiet cultural warfare. Outlandish? Maybe, but not impossible. After all, the Sphinx has always been a magnet for legend, intrigue, and slightly absurd footnotes in history. Its missing nose became a national obsession. Its body was once covered in hieroglyphs that were later erased. It's been blamed for earthquakes, floods, and at least one alien landing theory that really stretched the definition of science. So the idea that its beard might have gone on a Cold War vacation? Not entirely out of character. Still, the fragments you first saw in that dusty Cairo box remained Egypt's best bet. Damaged, mishandled, and partly glued together, yes, but real, tangible, ancient. And now that they were back in focus, the next logical step wasn't a display case or another glue gun. It was an investigation. You're standing now, mentally that is, in a room that hums with fluorescent lights and soft whispers of archival paper. The Cairo Museum, having learned its lesson about DIY restoration, finally assembles a proper team: conservators, Egyptologists, stone experts, even a few international consultants flown in with sensible shoes and magnifying visors. The beard, fractured and fragile, has drawn in the best minds from the sleepy corners of academia. You imagine them all huddled around the fragments like it's a high-stakes poker game. Someone in horn-rimmed glasses leans forward. Another nervously taps a pen against a clipboard. The beard lies on the table like a sacred relic, which frankly it is, and someone says the most dangerous sentence in archaeology: let's try and figure out where this thing has been. And so, the beard detectives are born. Their mission: trace the journey of the Sphinx's chin fringe. Not just when it broke off or where it was found, but everything in between. How it ended up in a storeroom, who handled it, who mishandled it, and whether parts are still missing. A treasure hunt, but with more spreadsheets and fewer booby traps. The first clue: the original excavation notes from the 1920s. You picture a faded notebook, brittle at the edges, smelling faintly of tobacco and history. Scribbled in French and a few scrawled sketches, someone drew the Sphinx's chin from a peculiar angle, marking a few stone fragments nearby. There's even a little doodle of what looks like a teacup. The archaeologist was clearly multitasking. These notes suggest the beard fragments were unearthed during routine clearing of debris near the Sphinx's base. They were cataloged, boxed, and promptly moved to the Cairo Museum. But then, nothing. Paper trail? More like a paper shrug. So the detectives dig deeper. Museum shipping records, customs manifests, even letters between mid-century directors, written on sun-faded letterhead with impressive government stamps. One memo contains a short but juicy line, fragments labeled as ceremonial beard, stored for later assessment. One piece on temporary loan to Luxor branch, 1958. Aha, off figuratively again, of course, to Luxor. The Luxor Museum, with its sunlit galleries and squeaky floors, has no record of ever displaying the piece. But a retired employee vaguely remembers a weird chin thing that was there for a bit, maybe, which is, frankly, the most helpful clue in days. Eventually, a small crate is located in an off-site storage facility beneath a mislabeled shelf of Roman oil lamps. And inside, another piece, heavier than the others. Same stone type, same braid pattern, beard confirmed. This sets off a ripple effect. A second search is launched across satellite museums, university archives, even old exhibits from international loan programs. One French institute admits sheepishly that a photo from a 1962 traveling show might have included the fragment. But we thought it was part of a sarcophagus, the curator says, blinking behind decades of red tape. Meanwhile, the fragments are examined under every type of scan known to man: X-rays, multispectral imaging, photogrammetry. A 3D model is rendered. You watch the computer slowly reconstruct what the beard might have looked like in its prime, a graceful curving form that dips below the chin and curls slightly upward at the end. The Osiris curve. It's like watching a ghost grow flesh, or rather, stone. But here's where things get weird. One fragment, larger than the rest and previously assumed to be from the base of the beard, doesn't match. The angle's wrong. The carving style is subtly off. The stone itself, similar, but not quite. Not Giza limestone. Cue the raised eyebrows and a fresh scholarly argument. Historians still argue whether this rogue piece was mistakenly included, brought from another site entirely, or perhaps part of a different sculpture that once stood nearby. A ceremonial copy, a training piece, or, let's be dramatic, a decoy placed intentionally to mislead looters? Even better, some believe this piece might have come from a now lost twin sphinx. You heard right, a second sphinx. This is one of those fringe debates that divides Egyptologists at conference cocktail hours. Some ancient texts and satellite scans suggest the possibility of a second sphinx once standing opposite the current one, forming a celestial gate of sorts. East and west, sun and moon, beard and anti-beard? No conclusive evidence exists, just whispers, lines in ancient hymns, and a few suspiciously flat platforms on the Giza Plateau that might have once supported something big, something lion-shaped, and yes, something bearded. You sip this possibility slowly, like lukewarm tea that tastes oddly of secrets. Back at the museum, the beard fragments are now tagged, photographed, and carefully supported on archival foam. One staffer jokes that it looks like an ancient orthodontic device. Another calls it the world's oldest fashion accessory. And someone else mutters, "You sure it's not just a piece of drainage pipe?" But the seriousness lingers, because this isn't just about the stone, it's about identity, national pride, the desire to stitch together a narrative that time and sand have worked so hard to erase. The beard was part of a face carved by people who believed deeply in permanence, that this statue would watch over them forever. And now you, drifting in your blanket cocoon, are one of those quiet watchers, tracing the shape of a broken ceremonial beard in your imagination. Each groove a mystery, each fragment a reminder that even the symbols of eternity need help holding themselves together sometimes. Now that the fragments are finally accounted for, mostly, the story starts to branch in less museum-y directions, because the beard isn't just a puzzle of broken limestone. It's also a breadcrumb trail through history, politics, and some rather shady whispers. You find yourself in a smoky Cairo cafe circa 1971. There's a man at the back table. You can't see his face, but he's gesturing broadly, explaining something about missing pieces, foreign interest, and the beard that vanished. The coffee is strong, the rumors stronger. Welcome to the weird world of antiquity smuggling. It starts subtly. During the 1950s and 60s, when Egypt's museums were still transitioning into better systems of cataloging and inventory, a few choice artifacts simply disappeared. Not dramatically, not all at once, just little things. A canopic jar here, a funerary amulet there, and according to some reports, one beard fragment. Yes, one of the curved, chiseled bits that might have once adorned the chin of the Great Sphinx may have gone AWOL. Or, if you prefer, gone international. Rumors began to surface in academic circles about a piece of the Sphinx's beard showing up at a private sale in Europe, a limestone fragment with that familiar braided texture. Nothing officially confirmed, no photos, no receipts, just a whisper of an auction catalog entry that described a ritual facial adornment, Egyptian origin, unverified. Historians still argue whether such a sale ever occurred or if it was just a scholarly game of telephone gone rogue. But the timing lined up suspiciously well. Right after the restoration debacle, right as Egypt was dealing with internal reshuffling and some very distracted museum management. One theory holds that an overzealous collector bribed a poorly paid worker. Another suggests the fragment was taken decades earlier and only noticed missing once people started actually caring again. And a third idea, less scandalous but oddly charming, proposes that the piece was gifted to a diplomat in the early 1900s, back when that kind of thing was weirdly considered polite. Here, ambassador, take this small chunk of our most iconic monument. No big deal. Of course, not all experts agree that a piece is truly lost. Some say the missing fragment might just be mislabeled, sitting under a different artifact tag somewhere in the vast catacombs of museum storage, somewhere between toes, unspecified origin, and broken animal head, possibly feline. Inventory errors were, and occasionally still are, astonishingly common. Egypt's major museums underwent decades of updates, but older records were handwritten, disorganized, and often color-coded by someone who really liked the color beige. Some boxes weren't opened for 40 years. And then there's the Cold War connection. Yes, really. During the height of geopolitical tension, cultural artifacts took on symbolic meaning. A country showing off its heritage was a subtle flex of, look how ancient and important we are. So some theorists, especially the ones who spend a little too much time at dusty conferences, speculate that a beard fragment might have been quietly transferred or loaned for diplomatic goodwill, or espionage, or just because someone misplaced the return label. You stretch your legs under the covers, imagining some double agent tucking a sliver of beard into a trench coat pocket while the guards discuss lunch. Not likely. But stranger things have happened in the history of museums. See also the time when stored a mummy in a chimney. In response to growing concerns, Egyptian authorities started conducting thorough audits in the 1980s and 90s. The Sphinx beard was flagged, finally, as a high-value priority. All known fragments were scanned, tagged, sealed, and in some cases rehoused in special climate-controlled chambers. But the missing piece, if it exists, it's still out there. And then there's the idea that we've been barking up the wrong chin altogether. Because what if the missing beard fragment isn't from the Sphinx? What if it was always from another statue? One that looked similar, sat nearby, and crumbled over time? You know, like when two eye parts get mixed and your bookshelf ends up with 4 left panels and no base. Some experts point to stylistic inconsistencies between the main fragments. One is more rounded, less ornate. Another has chisel marks inconsistent with Old Kingdom stone tools. Could this beard have been cobbled together from different sources, either in antiquity or much more recently? It wouldn't be the first time Egyptologists found themselves holding pieces of different puzzles. In fact, there's a quiet precedent for this. During earlier digs, archaeologists sometimes found decorative parts that were then reassembled based on best guesses. And let's just say best guesses from 1902 don't always hold up under modern analysis. So the beard detectives widen their scope. They look not just at the Sphinx, but other statues nearby, crumbled guardians, shattered deities, a pharaoh or two whose chin may also have once sported a fashionable stone accessory. In one particularly poetic twist, a single fragment, kept in a storage drawer in the Egyptian Museum's basement, is found to match none of the other pieces. Same general shape, same size, but completely different mineral makeup. Not Giza limestone at all. Where is it from? No one knows, which in a way is perfect, because the Sphinx beard, for all its lost pieces and wrong turns, isn't just a mystery of stone. It's a symbol of how we engage with the past, clumsily, passionately, and often guided more by stories than certainty. And sometimes those stories involve museum staff with questionable glue, whisper networks in Cairo cafes, and the eternal question, who exactly had the beard last? You smile softly to yourself, eyes growing heavier. Somewhere out there, maybe in a collector's glass case or a mislabeled archive, a tiny fragment of the Sphinx's beard waits. Quiet, patient, timeless. You find yourself walking through a quiet gallery, not in Cairo this time, but in a stark, minimalist museum in Berlin. The lights are cold and clinical. The displays are rigid, symmetrical. Somewhere in the distance, a motion sensor clicks softly, registering your imagined footsteps. Welcome to the rumor that refuses to die. Did part of the Sphinx's beard end up in East Germany? It starts with a catalog, a very dry, very bureaucratic list from a 1964 antiquities exchange program between Egyptian and East German museums. Most of the listed items are predictable: Roman coins, Ptolemaic oil lamps, shards of pottery that have seen more storage foam than sunlight. But then there's an odd line item: fragment, limestone, stylized plated pattern, ritual or decorative, source unverified. No photo, no dimensions, just that maddeningly vague description. And that's all it takes. Whispers begin among scholars. Could this be it? One of the missing pieces of the Sphinx's beard, shipped across the Iron Curtain, possibly as part of a goodwill gesture or quiet trade between state institutions? Historians still argue whether this transfer was ever intended as permanent. Some believe it was a temporary loan. Others think it was part of a larger unsanctioned deal, a favor traded behind closed doors for access to excavation reports or rare publications. Because yes, archaeologists can be petty like that. And there's this deliciously odd twist. The fragment was never displayed, at least not publicly. Instead, it ended up in a back room at the Museum für Vor- und Frühgeschichte, misfiled as a decorative relief and placed on a high shelf behind a bust of Emperor Augustus. For years, no one questioned it, until one sleepy intern in the late 90s blessed the interns, spotted a familiar pattern while cleaning the shelves: braided lines, curved base, slight beveling at the edge, something ancient stirred. The museum did a quiet internal review, sent a polite inquiry to Cairo, and received what can only be described as an uncomfortably worded "thank you. We'll take it from here." The piece was carefully packed, shipped back to Egypt, and received with little fanfare, but considerable side-eye. And yet, this too is unconfirmed. No official paper trail links that Berlin fragment to the Sphinx's beard. The piece, now stored under controlled conditions at the Grand Egyptian Museum, is labeled probable attachment, ceremonial facial adornment. That's museum speak for, we think it's part of the beard, but no one wants to say it out loud in case we're wrong. You lean in closer, picturing the smooth groove of the braid, the way the chisel marks run parallel, precise, like ancient fingerprint ridges. It feels like it fits. But then again, so do 100 other fragments from temples across Egypt. The Sphinx isn't the only statue with a taste for fashion. In fact, let's zoom out for a moment. False beards weren't limited to the Sphinx or even pharaohs. Priests wore them during rituals. Gods were carved with them as standard attire. Even the sacred Apis bulls, yes, bulls, were depicted with beards in temple carvings. Because nothing says divine authority like a bejeweled bovine goatee, and every one of those statues had the potential to lose a beard, break apart, and scatter its pieces across millennia. So, here's the deeper dilemma the beard detectives now face. How do you know which beard goes where? Imagine trying to match a puzzle piece without knowing if it even belongs to your puzzle, or if your puzzle was ever complete to begin with. It gets worse. In the mid-2000s, a private collector in Switzerland released high-resolution photos of their collection for academic study. Among the images, a small curved limestone artifact with plated carving, unprovenanced, no record of purchase, described simply as Egyptian decorative trim, 18th dynasty or earlier. Again, the resemblance is striking. Cairo authorities immediately reached out. No response. Eventually, the artifact disappeared from the published catalog. The collector claimed it was undergoing reevaluation, and like that, it was gone, possibly into a vault, possibly onto a private yacht somewhere off the coast of Monaco, possibly into a black market transaction with more zeros than historical sense. These episodes create a maddening mosaic of near misses, a piece here, a maybe piece there, all orbiting around the beard that once sat neatly under the Sphinx's solemn face like a punctuation mark of authority. And the frustrating thing, we might already have all the pieces. They might just be scattered across collections, misfiled, misidentified, or stuck in administrative limbo, waiting for a curious intern or a bored AI perhaps to piece them back together. Meanwhile, some scholars have shifted focus. Instead of endlessly chasing fragments, they've started asking new questions. What did the Sphinx look like with the beard fully intact? Was it added centuries after its original creation? Was it a symbol of reappropriation, of later pharaohs trying to link themselves to the divine image of Khafre or whoever the Sphinx was meant to be? And most hauntingly of all, what if the beard fragments we're fussing over were fakes? No, really. There's a fringe theory, unpopular but persistent, that suggests some of the original beard fragments may have been misidentified replicas from 19th century display models. Statues were often rebuilt in plaster for exhibitions in Europe and America. What if, somewhere along the way, real and replica got confused? What if one of the prized fragments was once part of a traveling World's Fair display? Cue existential crisis. You nestle deeper into your pillow, head spinning with timelines, shipments, and bearded bulls. The Sphinx itself remains silent through all of this, of course, staring forward, stoic, possibly amused. After all, it has the best seat in history, and you, dreamer that you are sitting beside it, tracing invisible beards through dusty archives and quiet museums. Somewhere, a fragment waits, and someone someday might finally whisper, "It fits." You find yourself wandering a museum again, but this time not through a marble hall or high-tech vault. No, this one feels different, less curated, more cluttered. Welcome to the Egypt Museum in the 1980s. Not the public-facing showcase, but behind the scenes, an administrative maze of paper folders, flickering lights, and more missing labels than you'd think possible for a country that invented record-keeping. This is the place where artifacts vanish, not in the dramatic curse of the mummy sense, but in the quietly bureaucratic one. It's where the Sphinx's beard got misplaced, misfiled, and misunderstood so many times it practically grew its own legend. You tiptoe through stacks of brown paper parcels, each marked in careful Arabic script, some dating back to the 1920s. One corner holds pottery shards. Another contains dusty sarcophagi lids that look suspiciously like doorstops. And somewhere, in the middle of a shelf labeled unverified limestone, maybe important, sits another piece of the beard. How did it get here? Well, let's just say that inventory management hasn't always been Egypt's strong suit. For decades, many of the country's archaeological treasures were stored with minimal tagging, if they were tagged at all. Museum inventories were kept on index cards, napkins, and in one case, the back of an archaeologist's grocery list. Items moved from site to site, department to department, often without formal tracking. It wasn't malicious, just chaotic. Historians still debate whether the chaos was accidental, systemic, or conspiratorially intentional. During certain political periods, keeping artifact locations vague was seen as a safeguard. If no one really knew where the priceless statue fragments were, it made them harder to steal, except, unfortunately, that also made them harder to find. And so, many objects ended up languishing in museum basements, like orphans of history. The Sphinx's beard was no exception. Various parts were listed under different names: ceremonial chin ornament, royal beard attachment, carved plate fragment, possible Osiris cult, and most poetically, thing that might go under a nose. You exhale slowly. Imagine being the conservator tasked with sorting this mess. You pick up one fragment and it crumbles slightly at the edge. Epoxy residue still clings stubbornly from that unfortunate mid-century repair attempt. You gently brush it away, and beneath is that familiar pattern of ridges, symmetrical and patient, like waves frozen in stone. In the late 90s, a major digitization effort began. Museum interns, always the heroes, began scanning barcodes onto newly numbered objects. But guess what? Some boxes had multiple unrelated fragments lumped together. One crate had beard pieces stored next to Greco Roman sandals. Another had a clearly labeled pharaonic beard piece sitting under a replica of Tutankhamun's flip flops. Again, not malicious, just very human. The chaos didn't stop at Cairo. Regional museums in Alexandria, Luxor, and Aswan held thousands of pieces in off-site depots. These facilities, sometimes little more than repurposed colonial offices or converted goat barns, stored items wrapped in newspapers from the 1950s and cushioned with disintegrating bubble wrap. In one particularly dramatic instance, a fragment was found balancing on a windowsill above a radiator, dangerously close to total thermal meltdown. Why? Because someone thought it was a practice carving. The beard, it seems, had become invisible through familiarity. Like that one painting you walk past every day in your grandma's hallway, you stop seeing it. It becomes background until someone finally looks closer. That moment came in 2005 when a joint German-Egyptian archival audit flagged multiple overlapping entries possibly referring to the same object. Translation: we might have 3 tags for the same beard piece, and no one knows where it is. The resulting scavenger hunt took 6 months. The final count? 8 fragments confirmed as belonging to the Sphinx's ceremonial beard. 5 matched with the known 1920s excavation records. 2 were newly identified, and one, oh, that mysterious one, was still questionable. Maybe real, maybe not. But at least now, they were together. Well, mostly. The current reconstruction, still partial, still gently debated, suggests the original beard was about 2.4 meters long, with a pronounced Osiris-style curl at the tip. It was likely fastened by pegs or stone dowels into sockets carved just below the Sphinx's chin. Some pegs remain, others have long since worn smooth. The stone itself? Giza limestone, but from a slightly different layer than the rest of the monument, suggesting, again, that the beard might have been added later, as a political statement, as a divine upgrade, or as one pharaoh's effort to give the Sphinx a bit more flair. You step back in your imagination and look at the fully restored shape, not physically attached, of course, just modeled via 3D scans. It's strange, isn't it? How something as mundane as facial hair could be so packed with meaning. A chin piece, a symbol of immortality, a mystery filed next to a pair of stone sandals. And this brings us to a curious idea floating through the halls of museum offices, that perhaps it's better not to reattach the beard. Many scholars now argue that trying to glue or peg the pieces back onto the Sphinx would risk more damage. The chin surface is fragile. The last epoxy experiment was suboptimal. And besides, the Sphinx as we know it, beardless, wind-smooth, dignified, is already an icon. Do we really need to fix it? Or can we let the beard rest in a display case gently lit, accompanied by the story of its absurd, winding, half-lost life? You lie back, let that idea wash over you. That sometimes preserving a mystery is better than solving it, that a missing piece can be as powerful as a whole, and that a beard, yes, even a beard, can carry thousands of years of silence, ceremony, and human error. You're now deep in the winding corridors of your imagination, wandering through the smoky halls of time, this time back into ancient Egypt, where beards weren't just style choices. They were political symbols, spiritual badges, status-flexing face furniture of the gods. Tonight, you're not just puzzling over stone, you're exploring what these ceremonial beards meant. Let's be clear. In ancient Egypt, you wouldn't just grow a beard and call it a day. That would be deeply unfashionable and, in most cases, downright unholy. The Egyptian elite were obsessed with cleanliness. Smooth skin was seen as divine, so much so that pharaohs and priests were routinely shaved head to toe. Real beards? Sweaty, dirty. Ugh, no thanks. So what did they do instead? They made beards. Beautiful, braided, perfectly stylized ones, crafted from gold, wood, and sometimes even silver, and fastened to their chins with delicate straps like the world's fanciest chin harness. You close your eyes and picture it. A pharaoh in full regalia, leopard skin cloak, tall white crown, crook and flail across the chest, and dangling below the chin, that elegant ceremonial beard, curved upward at the end if they were deceased or invoking Osiris, straight down if they were the living incarnation of Horus. Yes, even beard geometry had meaning. Historians still debate whether this style originated purely from religious iconography or whether it had more practical roots. Some think it started as a way to visually mimic Osiris, whose curled beard represented rebirth and eternal life. Others suggest it was an imitation of older Sumerian styles, borrowed, adapted, and made sacred over centuries. Whatever the origin, by the time of the New Kingdom, false beards were everywhere, not just on pharaohs, but on gods, statues, even sacred animals. In temple reliefs, you'll spot Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, rocking a tasteful chin piece. Even the sun god Ra, bearded. Osiris, always. Anubis, beard game strong. But not all beards were created equal. You shift positions slightly in bed as you recall this delightful nuance. Beard type reflected rank. Pharaohs wore long, narrow beards, sometimes ribbed or segmented. Gods typically had stylized curled beards, always upward like a fancy mustache gone vertical. Meanwhile, lower-level officials like priests or high scribes might wear shorter versions during specific ceremonies. There was even a rumor that during the festival of Opet, an important religious celebration held annually in Thebes, temple guards were allowed to wear ceremonial chin pieces as a mark of temporary divine favor. Can you imagine being issued a dress uniform and a fake beard? It's like the ancient world's version of, you get to wear the cool hat today. In some mortuary temples, archaeologists have discovered tiny gold fasteners and bits of thread, suggesting that false beards might have also been burned with the dead, sent into the afterlife along with bread, beer, and other essentials. Because who wants to wake up in the next world looking underdressed? One particular find, a gilded wooden beard discovered in the tomb of Tutankhamun, became a subject of immense fascination. It was delicately carved, painted, and attached with surprising practicality. No superglue, no staples, just clever design and reverence for the role it played. Tut's beard, unlike the Sphinx's, was preserved with care. But the Sphinx, the Sphinx. Its beard was symbolic on a much grander scale. Remember, this wasn't a living person. It was a monument, possibly the oldest monumental sculpture still standing on Earth. And whoever gave it a beard, whether during construction or centuries later, wasn't just decorating a statue. They were making a divine declaration. Adding a beard to the Sphinx transformed it from a mythical guardian into an embodiment of pharaonic power. It wasn't just the Sphinx, it was the Sphinx as Pharaoh. The beard was the bridge between man and God. You lie still now, imagining the ceremony, the beard being installed, not unlike a ribbon cutting at a modern monument, incense burning, priests chanting, the limestone gleaming in the afternoon sun, someone muttering something about how the beard looks slightly crooked, and someone else hissing, "Don't ruin the moment." Of course, the specifics of that moment are lost to time. Historians still argue whether the beard was part of the original sculpture from the Old Kingdom, carved under Khafre, or if it was added later during a period of religious restoration. Some evidence points to New Kingdom repairs, when pharaohs like Thutmose IV tried to associate themselves with older gods and kings. It was around this time that the famous dream stele was placed between the Sphinx's paws, a stone plaque recording how young Thutmose, while napping in the shade of the buried statue, was promised kingship if he cleared away the sand. Spoiler, he cleared it. He ruled. And the Sphinx, newly excavated and possibly newly bearded, became the ultimate royal PR project. There's even a theory that the beard was never meant to be permanent, that it was a ceremonial add-on, removed and reattached during festivals, kind of like swapping out the good tableware for holidays. But whatever the intention, the beard mattered. And so its absence today is more than just a cosmetic gap. It's a break in the story. A dangling thread in an otherwise glorious tapestry of divine identity, royal ambition, and masterful stonework. You picture the Sphinx again, weathered, silent, face turned ever so slightly to the east, waiting for sunrise, its beard, long gone, now just a shadow remembered in stone sockets and storage boxes. And yet, in your mind, it's there, not glued, not reconstructed, just remembered, perfect in its incompleteness. You're back at the Giza Plateau, but this time it's the 1970s. The sun is blazing, tour buses rattle in from Cairo, camera shutters click like locusts, vendors offer everything from Coca-Cola to carved ankh necklaces, and the Great Sphinx sits calmly through it all, still missing its beard, still enduring the centuries, still pretending not to notice that someone is trying to climb its left paw for a better photo. Because now, dear sleeper, we enter the most chaotic phase of the beard's story. Tourism, theft, and the peculiar idea that some people might have tried to steal it. Yes, seriously. Let's start with the tourists. After the Suez Crisis and political instability of the 50s and 60s, Egypt saw a massive boom in foreign visitors. The pyramids and the Sphinx weren't just ancient monuments anymore. They were Instagram before Instagram. A place to be photographed, to be seen, to say, I was here next to that. But with increased attention came increased accidents. Guards were often overworked, underpaid, and occasionally bribed. Tourists climbed where they weren't supposed to. One infamous photo shows a man from Belgium hugging the Sphinx's paw, grinning like he just got backstage at a Beatles concert. And while most visitors were respectful, others weren't above pocketing a souvenir. Historians still argue whether any real pieces of the Sphinx or its ceremonial beard were taken during this time. Officially, no, but whispers say otherwise. A former museum technician recalled years later that in 1976 someone had returned a mysterious fragment anonymously by mail. It arrived in a box labeled "Stone Returned to Egypt." Inside, a chunk of pale limestone, intricately grooved, suspiciously beard-like. It wasn't logged officially, probably to avoid embarrassment, but rumor has it, it now sits in a backroom drawer, filed under possible artifact, no chain of custody. There's even a post-it on it that just says, mustache. And that's not even the weirdest part. In the late 1980s, Egyptian officials investigated a tip about a man in Cairo allegedly trying to sell part of the Sphinx's beard on the black market. He claimed it had been passed down from his grandfather, who had worked near the Giza site. No one could verify the origin, of course, but the carving was eerily familiar. Authorities arrested the man, but the charges were dropped when the object tested as period-accurate replica. Translation: a well-aged fake. But it sparked something. If there were fakes, were there real pieces floating around? That's when the myth of the traveling beard emerged. A whispery tale among museum insiders claiming that at least one chunk of the beard had spent time abroad, possibly in private hands, possibly on display under a different name, possibly even mistaken for Roman masonry at one point. Of course, none of this has been confirmed, but you know how these things go. Enough whispers, and eventually someone listens. Meanwhile, back at the actual Sphinx, Egyptian authorities were becoming increasingly worried. Tourists leaning on the stones, smog eating away at the limestone, and erosion speeding up thanks to rising groundwater. In response, the Sphinx underwent several rounds of conservation work throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Part of that included discussions about the beard. Could it be restored? Should it be restored? A team of engineers conducted structural assessments. They analyzed stress points on the chin. They ran simulations. And the answer was clear: no. Reattaching the beard, even if they had every piece, which they didn't, would likely do more harm than good. The chin had weakened over the centuries. Any extra weight could cause cracks or dislodge other parts of the face. And let's be honest, we've already learned our lesson about glue, so the idea was shelved. The fragments, lovingly cleaned and documented, were placed in controlled storage, and the Sphinx remained as it was: stoic, silent, beardless. But even without reattachment, the beard still stirred strong emotions. Some traditionalists argued that not restoring it was disrespectful, that it was like leaving a crown off a king. Others believed the beard was never original to begin with, and leaving it off was closer to the truth. And then there were the conspiracy theorists. Oh, yes. This wouldn't be a full Egyptian mystery without at least one fringe theory involving ancient aliens. According to some particularly colorful blogs, the beard wasn't just ornamental, it was a key, a sort of energetic tuning fork meant to harmonize planetary frequencies through the Sphinx's jawline. You chuckle softly in the dark. Sure, it sounds absurd, but you've got to admire the creativity. Ancient stone facial hair as cosmic antenna isn't a theory you hear every day. Meanwhile, Egypt's tourism industry continued to grow. Millions visited the Giza Plateau each year. The Sphinx became a symbol again, not just of mystery, but of cultural pride. School children drew it. Tour companies used it on brochures. Street artists painted it with sunglasses and cell phones. And all the while, the beard fragments sat patiently in their foam-lined drawers. But even tucked away, they weren't forgotten. Periodically, researchers returned to them, remeasured, rephotographed, laser scanned. Some argued they should go on display with an augmented reality overlay, allowing visitors to see the beard reattached virtually. Others thought the beard deserved its own exhibit, an entire wing dedicated to a chin piece. After all, it had been lost, found, broken, glued, debated, tracked across continents, possibly stolen, definitely overglued, and almost certainly misfiled under miscellaneous jaw decor at least once. That's quite a resume. So you lie back now, feeling the weight of time behind your eyes. Picture the Sphinx bathed in moonlight, its face smooth, its expression unreadable. Below the chin, a ghost of stone. Not forgotten, but not quite found either. A fragment of a fragment. A beard without a face. Or perhaps a face still waiting to be completed. It's just before dawn now. In your mind, you're sitting on a low stone wall at Giza, wrapped in a blanket against the desert chill. The sky is beginning to glow, an eerie gray gold shimmer that seems to rise straight out of the sand. The Sphinx is still and silent, as always. And you're wondering, was that beard really meant for this face? Because tonight we step directly into the heart of scholarly debate. The one question that has stubbornly clung to every analysis, every fragment, every photograph. Was the Sphinx's beard really its beard? Historians still argue whether the beard was original to the monument or added centuries later. In some corners of academia, this has become an unexpectedly spicy topic. Elbows have been nudged at conferences, eyebrows have been raised at symposiums. One scholar allegedly even stormed out of a panel over a particularly smug comment about mortise depth. Let's break it down. The strongest evidence in favor of the beard being original comes from the fragments themselves. Some of them have small indentations that align, at least roughly, with sockets on the Sphinx's chin. A few dowel holes suggest attachments, and stylistically, the braiding resembles other Old Kingdom royal iconography. Seems like a slam dunk, right? Well, not exactly. Critics argue that the carving style of the beard fragments more closely matches New Kingdom design, not Old Kingdom. In particular, the curvature and segmented detail resemble those found in statues from the reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, over 1,000 years after the Sphinx was built. That's a long time for a statue to go beardless. One theory suggests that later pharaohs, especially those eager to connect themselves to the golden age of pyramid building, may have refurbished the Sphinx, adding a ceremonial beard as a form of symbolic appropriation. Look, they were saying, we honor our glorious ancestors. Also, please notice how cool we look doing it. And this wasn't unusual. Egypt's history is full of rulers modifying older monuments, carving their names over previous inscriptions, or altering features to reflect the theology and politics of the moment. So it's entirely plausible that the Sphinx got a little post-construction grooming. Other scholars go further and suggest that the fragments may not belong to the Sphinx at all. Instead, they propose that the beard pieces originated from one of the adjacent temples or statues nearby. The Valley Temple of Khafre, for instance, contains numerous colossal statues, some broken, some only partially excavated, that could have had beards of their own. So how did these fragments end up near the Sphinx? Sand, time, and a few millennia of foot traffic can play tricks. Erosion collapses walls, floods dislodge blocks. Even minor earthquakes have historically shifted entire sections of the plateau. And once the fragments were buried in sand, context was lost. Without precise excavation records or photographic evidence from their original position, it becomes a guessing game. Like finding a Lego piece in your couch and trying to remember if it came from your spaceship or your medieval tavern set. Still, the majority consensus leans toward the beard being intended for the Sphinx, at least symbolically, even if added later. Those who support this view point out that the Sphinx already has the uraeus cobra headdress, another standard element of royal iconography. So the beard, if not original, would have completed the full divine portrait. Others, however, raise a question that's harder to shake. What if the Sphinx was never meant to represent a specific pharaoh at all? This idea, while still outside the mainstream, has gained traction in recent decades. Some Egyptologists argue that the Sphinx's face is more generalized than portraits of Khafre, that it may represent a divine or mythical being rather than a historical individual, or possibly a composite, part lion, part king, part celestial guardian. If that's the case, then the beard becomes even more ambiguous. Was it a pharaonic statement, a later addition, or an act of retroactive branding by a dynasty trying to borrow gravitas? And let's not forget the materials themselves. The beard fragments are made from harder limestone than the Sphinx's body, another sign they may have come later. While it's possible the sculptors sourced different limestone layers for structural reasons, the mismatch has always been a puzzle. You imagine a team of stonemasons standing around the Sphinx in 1300 BCE, squinting up at its chin, discussing how best to install the ceremonial beard without dropping it on someone's foot. Perhaps one mason asks, "Are we sure this is supposed to be here?" And the foreman replies, "Just drill the hole, Horemheb." Pragmatic decisions get mistaken for grand design all the time. Modern restorations have done little to resolve the mystery. Though 3D scans allow researchers to virtually test the fit of each fragment against the Sphinx's chin, the results remain inconclusive. Some pieces align, sort of. Others don't align at all, and one in particular appears to curve at an angle that would make reattachment impossible unless the Sphinx had a second, secret chin. Which, to be clear, it does not. So you lie there now, comfortably warm, eyes half closed, and wonder, does it matter? Whether the beard belonged to the Sphinx or its neighbor, whether it was carved in 2500 BCE or 1300 BCE, whether it ever truly hung from that chin or merely aspired to, it's all part of the same slow-moving, dust-covered story, the kind where meaning gets layered like sediment, and truth is less about what happened and more about what we believe happened. The beard, in this sense, is Schrödinger's artifact, at once part of the Sphinx and separate from it, belonging and not belonging, lost and found, historic and speculative. And isn't that the most fitting outcome for the most mysterious statue on Earth? The Sphinx has seen better days, sure, but you wouldn't know it from the crowds. You're back in the early 2000s now, standing beside a small group of engineers and art restorers, all squinting into tablets and fanning themselves with notepads. It's hot, the kind of heat that melts ambition. But today, something big is happening. Another attempt to fix the beard is on the table. Or more accurately, it's being debated into oblivion on a patio overlooking the Giza Plateau. You can almost hear the quiet war of sighs and side-eyes as two schools of thought collide. Restore it, say one group. It's part of the monument's original grandeur. Absolutely not, reply the others. We already glued it once. Have we learned nothing? And they've got a point. Because that previous restoration, the now notorious 1950s epoxy job, left scars, both literal and reputational. The fragments were slathered with adhesive, bonded awkwardly, then left to sit like a broken toy lovingly repaired by a child with access to industrial sealant. Historians still argue whether that epoxy mix caused lasting chemical damage. Some say it seeped into the porous stone and made re-restoration impossible. Others believe the real problem wasn't the glue, it was the haste, the need to make it look right for display. So when the idea of trying again came up, a different kind of restoration was proposed. No glue, no reattachment, just documentation, digital modeling, and maybe a respectful display that would allow the fragments to sit near the Sphinx, not on it. A sort of reunion without the stress of structural engineering. But not everyone was thrilled. In 2013, a leaked photo from a storage facility revealed the beard fragments lying on foam mats next to a can of epoxy. The internet lost its collective mind. Conservation blogs exploded. A few well-meaning journalists published headlines like, "Ancient beard glued back together with craft store supplies." And while the truth was a little less dramatic, no, they didn't actually apply more glue, it reignited the debate about restoration ethics. Eventually, Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities stepped in with a public statement. Yes, the fragments existed. No, they weren't being reattached. Yes, conservation was ongoing. And yes, previous restoration efforts had left their mark. But they were doing their best, which, to be fair, they were. The fragments had been scanned, digitally matched, and modeled in 3D environments. Museums across the globe were invited to examine the data, and conservators began drafting plans for long-term storage that didn't involve cardboard boxes and ambient humidity levels that could pickle a sandwich. Then came the question, should the public see it? There were two camps. Camp A, put it in a glass case. Tell the whole story, epoxy mishap and all. Let people see the fragments up close. The beard, after all, had been through more drama than most daytime soap operas. It deserved its spotlight. Camp B. Keep it in storage, out of respect, out of caution. Some even suggested that displaying it would distract from the Sphinx's mystery, as if mystery were something that could be smudged by too much context. Meanwhile, a third group proposed something wonderfully weird, a holographic reattachment. Picture this. Visitors could stand in front of the Sphinx, put on an augmented reality headset, and see the beard reappear in perfect position. Floating, glowing, untouched. No risk, no glue, just light. You smile at the thought. Imagine walking up to that colossal stone face, headset in place, and watching as the ceremonial beard clicks gently into view, reuniting with the Sphinx like a cosmic jigsaw piece, all without touching a single grain of stone. We haven't done it yet, but the technology's there, and it might be the most elegant solution we've got. Still, others caution against even that, because if we virtually complete the Sphinx, we may overwrite the story of its loss. The brokenness, the uncertainty, the beautiful imperfection that makes it human. Or at least, more than stone. It's a philosophical dilemma, really. What's more authentic? A monument as it was, as it is, or as we imagine it? You lie back now, that question echoing softly in your thoughts like a desert breeze through ruined temples. The beard, by this point, is more than limestone. It's metaphor. It's memory. It's a symbol of how we fumble to preserve things that weren't designed to last forever. And through it all, the Sphinx just watches. Chin lifted, beardless, utterly unbothered. Sometimes you don't need to fix something to understand it. Sometimes what's missing tells the better story. You're drifting now, not just in thought, but in time. Not walking through sand or museum halls, but floating gently through the realm of what if. Because at this point, with so many versions of the truth, we must consider a very real possibility. What if the beard was never really missing at all? No, not because it's sitting intact in a crate somewhere behind the janitor's closet in the Grand Egyptian Museum. And no, not because a tourist smuggled it out and turned it into a coffee table. But rather, what if we've been looking at the whole thing through the wrong lens? Let's play with some fringe theories. Not the kind with tinfoil hats and hieroglyphs that spell UFO, but the speculative sort that makes academics sigh softly into their coffee. The kind that makes you tilt your head and think, well, maybe. One theory suggests that the Sphinx's beard wasn't a beard at all. That, what we're calling a ceremonial chin piece, might have been something else entirely. A symbolic architectural element, a decorative frieze, or even a sculptural offering. After all, the fragments we've found aren't enormous. They're intricate, yes, but not necessarily sized in a way that screams this was proudly hanging under a massive chin. A few scholars argue that they may have belonged to a smaller statue, perhaps a guardian figure or ritual object placed near the Sphinx rather than on it. Historians still debate whether the original context of these pieces was ever accurately recorded. The 1920s dig notes are, shall we say, casually written. Some have little more than sketches, directional arrows, and vague labels like found under sand near chin, which, if you've ever seen the Giza Plateau, is basically like saying somewhere on Earth. So, could these fragments have come from a completely different statue? Or, brace yourself, could they have been ceremonial duplicates? In ancient Egypt, especially during the New Kingdom, it wasn't unusual for temples to keep multiple versions of sacred items. Think of them as ritual backups. Extra crooks, duplicate crowns, spare offering bowls, and yes, possibly alternative beards. Maybe the Sphinx had a ceremonial beard that was attached only during specific festivals, installed temporarily and then removed. That would explain the shallow sockets beneath the chin, not designed for permanent attachment, but for a beard that came and went with the seasons. This idea gains traction when you consider the logistics. The Sphinx isn't exactly easy to climb. Installing and removing a heavy limestone piece would require scaffolding, tools, and a crew of very careful workers. But if the beard were smaller, lighter, or even symbolic, a detachable ritual item, it might have been manageable, and it changes the tone of the story entirely. Instead of a lost artifact, we're talking about a seasonal accessory, a ceremonial prop, something that wasn't supposed to survive the ages, but did, at least in pieces. Another theory, whispered in footnotes and over conference wine, posits that some of the existing beard fragments could be ancient replicas, objects created not during the Old Kingdom, but centuries later as part of Egypt's long tradition of religious revival. Pharaohs of the New Kingdom were known to refurbish older temples, even to create art in the style of their ancestors. What if these fragments weren't from 2500 BCE at all, but rather from 1300 BCE, when Egypt was going through a kind of retro spiritual phase? It's like how modern architects might design a new building to look like it's from the 1800s. Aesthetic nostalgia isn't just a modern trend, the ancient world was full of it. So maybe these Sphinx beard fragments were created as part of a restoration that never finished, or an homage to the Sphinx that was meant to stand beside it, not on it. Either way, the implication is clear. What we thought was missing might never have been there in the first place. You pause, letting that ripple out across your thoughts. The idea that the whole mystery might be built on a false assumption, that the beard, the object we've tracked across museums and borders and through layers of glue and scandal, may not even be what we think it is. And maybe that's okay, because in some strange way, the pursuit itself has become more interesting than the object. The chase, the discovery, the questions, the failed answers. Maybe the Sphinx's beard exists not as a physical relic, but as a story, a shape in the sand that reflects our desire to piece together a past we can never fully know, a fragment that reminds us how fragile certainty is, and how comforting a mystery can be when we learn to let it remain one. You pull your blanket higher and imagine the ancient artisans carving those curved lines. Maybe they laughed while doing it. Maybe they were just doing their job, never guessing that 4,000 years later, strangers would lie in bed wondering where their careful handiwork had gone. And just maybe, one of them left a tiny imperfection on purpose, a deliberate error in the carving, a message etched in stone. This isn't the whole story. You're on the Giza Plateau again, but this time you're seeing it with new eyes. The early morning haze lingers like silk across the sand, and before you lies the Sphinx, timeless and still, its profile sharp against the awakening sky. But now, in your imagination, you try something bold. You give it its beard back. Not just any beard, the full ceremonial flourish, freshly carved and neatly affixed. A proud braided chin piece curving slightly upward, shimmering with the sacred geometry of ancient design. And suddenly, the entire image shifts. You start to reimagine the Sphinx, not as we see it now, worn smooth by time, its features faded, but as it might have looked on the day of its unveiling. Painted, bearded, crowned. Yes, painted, because this towering lion-human hybrid wasn't always the mellow sandstone color you know today. Oh no, the ancient Egyptians loved color. Their statues weren't carved to blend with the desert. They were meant to stand out. Historians still debate the original paint scheme, but fragments of red pigment on the Sphinx's face suggest it once wore a rich, earthy hue. Some scholars imagine the headdress striped in blue and yellow, much like Tutankhamun's mask. Eyes outlined in black coal-like lines, watching the sun rise every morning with unwavering resolve. And now, add that beard. Carved stone, maybe painted too, gilded even. The ultimate power accessory. Beneath the chin, it would have added an architectural flourish, part divine, part decorative. You step further into this vision. The Sphinx isn't isolated like it is today. Instead, it's part of a living, breathing ceremonial space. Behind it, temples buzz with priests and rituals. Incense curls into the sky, chanting hums through colonnades. The dream stele hasn't been erected yet, but the monument already whispers secrets to the faithful who kneel at its massive paws. And they would have looked up to see that chin piece shining, a visual echo of Pharaoh's past, a beard not of hair, but of meaning. But then your thoughts take a softer turn. What if this version, the beardless one, is no less powerful? In fact, what if the stripped down, eroded Sphinx is the more authentic face, the one that endured? Because think about it. What we see today is the result of more than 4,000 years of weather, sandstorms, political chaos, neglect, admiration, and questionable museum storage practices. And yet, it still sits, intact. Iconic. Would we even recognize it with a beard? Would it feel like our Sphinx? There's something oddly comforting about its bare chin now, its calm face, the way its features have been softened, not erased, like a grandparent whose wrinkles are a map of every smile and storm they've ever known. You think back to when the idea of restoring the beard came up again. The experts debated everything: the structural integrity of the chin, the chemical residue from the epoxy, the cost, the politics, the optics. But the most poignant point came from a conservator who simply said, if we put it back, we lose the version the world fell in love with. And that landed like a stone tablet dropped from a scaffold, because there's a difference between restoration and resurrection, between respecting history and rewriting it. The beard, for all its symbolic weight, might now belong more to the past than the present. That's not to say it shouldn't be displayed. It should. It deserves a room of its own. Spotlights, quiet reverence, a small plaque that reads, ceremonial beard fragment, possibly from the Great Sphinx, definitely from a great story. But the Sphinx can remain exactly as it is, majestic in its incompleteness. Iconic, not because it's perfect, but because it has endured. You smile now, half asleep, half still lingering in that mental reconstruction. You imagine tourists showing up one day to see a sphinx with a holographic beard projected in soft blue light. A guide points it out, some ooh, some ah, some squint, and say, I think I liked it better without. And maybe that's the point. The beard existed. Or maybe it didn't. Or maybe it did, but only briefly, a ceremonial edition worn like a pharaoh's makeup, intended to fade. And in that fading, the Sphinx didn't lose anything. It became something else, a canvas of curiosity, a conversation across time. And so you lie there, the shape of the Sphinx flickering behind your closed eyes, you see it crowned in color, and yes, even with its beard back on for just a moment. But then the beard fades again, as the dream does. Not vanished, just no longer needed, like a whisper carried off by the wind. The wind picks up slightly over the plateau as you lie there, imagine sand brushing gently across your toes. The Sphinx is still as it always is. And in this final chapter of our journey, we return to the simplest, truest fact of all. Time erodes everything, even the divine beards of kings. You watch the sky shift colors overhead, from deep midnight to pale early blue. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the stars have already started to fade, like reluctant actors bowing out of a very long play. And that's exactly what the Sphinx has been part of: a play, a performance staged for thousands of years. The lead character, a silent, lion-bodied guardian with a face worn smooth by wind and worship. Its beard, whether original or added, worn proudly or reattached with questionable glue, was just one prop in a vast production, a symbol, a flourish, something made by hands now dust, and lost, found, debated, and puzzled over by generations that would have seemed like space travelers to its original builders. There's a strange kind of peace in that, isn't there? You glance one last time at the limestone face. You know it well now. The contours, the mysteries, that gentle tilt of the eyes, the faint trace of a smile that may not have been intended but feels real anyway. And beneath it, the chin that once held something grand, something royal. You imagine the moment it fell, whether from age, neglect, or the careless touch of time. Not a dramatic crash, but a quiet thunk, muffled by layers of sand. Maybe no one noticed, maybe someone did and just didn't know what it was. Maybe it slipped away, as everything eventually does, without fanfare. Historians still argue whether we'll ever fully know the beard's origin story, whether it's truly gone, or if another fragment waits in some attic in Istanbul or crate in Cape Town. Some suggest that more pieces will turn up eventually, that someday it will all be clear. But clarity, like limestone, is fragile. And part of the magic, the real shimmering, whispering magic, is that we don't know. We've followed this thread through dynasties, desert winds, epoxy disasters, Cold War trade rumors, and ceremonial goat barns. And where does it lead? Right back to the Sphinx. The same patient monument, the same carved stillness, the same weathered knowing face. You begin to feel the pull of sleep now, your limbs heavy, your thoughts slowing to a soft crawl. But even in this half dream, you see the Sphinx again. Not as a ruin, not as a riddle, but as a survivor, a witness. And the beard? Maybe it was never meant to stay. Maybe it was a gift to the gods, offered once and then returned to the earth to be carried by sand and memory. Or maybe Just maybe, it's still there, in spirit, in silence, in every quiet breath that brushes across the ancient stone before vanishing into the air. So now, as you drift towards sleep, let everything soften. Let the lines of the Sphinx fade from view, the stone dissolve into sand, the sand into dusk. Imagine yourself resting beneath a sky full of ancient stars, the air warm and dry, the earth steady beneath you. There is no need to search anymore. The mystery you've held in your hands, this story of a beard, lost and lost again, can now be set down. It doesn't need to be solved, it only needs to be remembered, gently. Like a tune hummed in the dark, the Sphinx will still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and long after our questions have faded, it will keep watching the horizon unbothered by glue, debate, or missing chin pieces. You can rest now too. You've wandered through temples and storerooms, stood beside kings, sat in dusty archives, and whispered with ghosts. You've listened carefully, and now it's time to let the story close its eyes with you. So breathe slowly, let the night cradle you, nothing more to figure out, no pieces to collect, only silence, only stars, only stillness. Sleep well.